I hope this is not you guys. I put this on here because I thought it was funny. 2% stuff I should know for school. Right? That's how we all feel some days. But hopefully yours is a little bit higher than 2%. As we get into the second portion of brain, there are some questions that you can see here. This is all reflection for A1. So what you should be able to do is go ahead and answer those questions. If you feel like you have any problems with answering them, then you want to go back to the information in A1 and maybe look over any that you're not 100% sure about. So I hope that everybody who has already watched the A1 lecture knows the 4 major parts to the brain. Do you guys know that? Cerebrum, cerebellum, diencephalon, brainstem. Okay, so make sure you know the names of the lobes and then what are the general functions of each. So like you may have a question that says what is the general function of a lobe, or it could say what is the blank lobe responsible for. So that summation slide that I said, make sure you star that, really look at that. That will be very, very helpful for you as you're going through trying to study, keeping different parts of the brain separate. Okay, so for our white matter, again, what's the difference between white and gray?
White is myelinated.
White is myelinated. Very good. So white is our myelinated axons. Gray is either the unmyelinated axons or the cell bodies. So what we're going to be talking about on these first few slides is going to be white matter. So we're talking about myelinated axons. We've got different types of fibers that are going to run through the brain. So the first one that you see here is association fibers. And what you want to remember for association fibers is they form connections within the same hemisphere. So if you think about the people that you associate with, you guys run in the same circles. So these would be like your friends that you would say, hey, do you guys want to go out to eat? Y'all are going to go to the same restaurant. So association fibers are in the same hemisphere. There are 2 different types. The arcuate fibers are short and they make an arch. And then we have the longitudinal, which are going to be longer fibers. So the arcuate fibers, as you can see down here in the picture, it's these blue ones. And they're going to go from gyri to gyri. So that's why they're so short. It's because it's just from one little hill to another little hill. Whereas the longitudinal fibers, you can see the red fibers are much longer and they are going to run to the frontal lobe as well as other lobes to connect everything from the front, or excuse me, I should say from the anterior to the posterior aspect of the brain. Okay, so those are your association fibers. Your commissural fibers, think of these like a bridge, because we talked about a bridge in the last class. That bridge was called the Corpus Callosum. Now you actually get to see a picture of that Corpus Callosum here. So the Corpus Callosum is the major bridge that is going to connect the right and the left hemisphere together. You can see that it contains 200 million axons and carries some 4 billion impulses per second. There's a lot of information that's going to be running through the corpus callosum to make sure that the right and the left brain can efficiently communicate with one another. And then we also have the anterior commissure. You can see that it's another bridge that will connect right to left side. And then lastly, we have projection fibers. So these are going to link the cerebral cortex to other parts of the brain. So those 3 parts that you just mentioned, and the spinal cord. So think about these, they project to other parts of the brain and central nervous system, because now we've got the spinal cord involved in this as well. What we're going to call all of the ascending and descending projection fibers is the internal capsule. So we can look at the previous picture for this. You can see these are kind of projecting up in a superior direction as we are looking at them on this particular picture. But there's ascending and descending tracks, put them all together, and we would call them an internal capsule. So projection fibers are going to go amongst all parts of the brain as well as spinal cord. All right, so what are our 3 types of fibers?
Association.
Association. Projection and commissural. Very good, right? Either it's one hemisphere, it's both hemispheres, or it's all parts of the brain and the spinal cord. Okay? That's how we're going to have this communication going on. Now, when we talk about the basal nuclei, these are going to be masses of gray matter. So gray matter, we just talked about white fibers. Now we're talking about gray matter. These are going to be embedded within the white matter of the cerebrum. So if you look at this brain in this particular section, you can see the outer cortex is gray. You can see the inside of this brain is white. However, we have the basal nuclei, which are these masses of gray matter that are important in subconscious activities. That's the word that you want to make sure you understand with basal nuclei. This is subconscious. This is not conscious effort. This is things that your body is going to do all by itself. The basal nuclei includes a couple of different structures, such as the caudate nucleus, the lentiform, putamen, globus pallidus. All of these structures are going to help in subconscious adjustment and modification of voluntary motor commands. So whenever I pick up my cup off of this table over here, I know basically that my arm is going to bring the cup over to my face as I have a goal of drinking the water. What I don't want to do is I don't want to pick up the cup and splash the water all over my face because my arm jerked it too hard. So there's a subconscious underlying regulation of my motor tone that allows me to have the right amount of power, not too much and not too little. And then whenever I go to set the cup down, I don't need to do this, right? That's unnecessary. So basal nuclei is going to allow me to gently set it on the table so that I have that normal motor movement and I don't scare people thinking that there's a gunshot going off, right? So our basal nuclei is all subconscious modification. Where we see problems with this is going to be in Parkinson's disease. So if you think about a Parkinson's patient, you know, if you've ever seen them walk before, they have a shuffle to their feet whenever they walk. They don't have the ability to just do a normal stop and start. So we take that for granted that we do have the ability to walk, and if somebody calls our name, then we can immediately stop, turn around, look. That's not really very difficult for us. But a Parkinson's patient, because they don't have that subconscious control of their motor activity anymore, it looks like shuffling of the feet or shaking of the hands. So when they're trying to read the newspaper, it's very hard because their hands shake. So now it's very difficult to focus your eyes whenever the paper is shaking right in front of you. So what's going on here is that the activity of the basal nuclei is actually inhibited by dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter that gets released by neurons in the substantia nigra of the midbrain. We'll be looking at the midbrain today, so you'll see where the substantia nigra of the midbrain is. If that structure is damaged, or if the neurons secrete less dopamine, the basal nuclei is going to become more active. Okay, so it's no longer being inhibited, and we don't have those fluid stop-start movements anymore. So what happens is there is an increase in the muscle tone, and then you will get those difficulties with those voluntary movements because the opposing muscle groups do not relax. The basal nuclei is far too active, and so therefore that subconscious regulation is no longer working as it's supposed to. Okay? If we look at the limbic system, this is going to be emotional brain. So that's why I put this in red here, because we've been talking about the cerebrum in regards to logic and planning. We talked a little bit about left brain versus right brain being a little bit more creative, things of that nature. However, whenever it comes to the limbic system, this is all emotional, and sometimes these particular emotions don't always make sense on a logical basis. So do any of you in here suffer from road rage? A few of you, okay. So that means that if we were to basically look at your brain during that moment, the limbic system would be firing. So there's a particular structure within the limbic system, I'll show you here in just a second, that would probably be the most active during that road rage time. So what this does is this will link the conscious functions of the cerebral cortex with autonomic functions of the brainstem, as well as facilitating memory storage and retrieval. But remember, this is all about emotional states. Here's some of the structures that you can see in regards to the limbic system. So I put the red boxes around them, these different structures. If you like pictures, you can look at the structures on this particular picture. If you like words, this is your slide right here. But these are all of the different structures that you would find within the limbic system. Now, let's look at a close-up picture of our limbic system. And what you can see here is that there is this structure right here called the amygdaloid body, or some books reference it as the amygdala. This is the one that will cause those road rage, anger. You know, it's not just road rage, so I don't want to just pick on those people, but it's also whenever you get really angry about things and there's really no logical basis for you to be that mad about something. The amygdala is something that can be impacted negatively, and they have tried to do studies on people who show those emotions that are not based upon logic to see if they have structural changes within their amygdala, and sometimes the amygdala is actually larger in these people, which causes them to be more active in that particular area. The hippocampus is an area of the limbic system that will help with storing memories. So whenever you're looking at this picture that is blown up, I also want you to see this olfactory tract. What does olfactory help us do? Smell, right? So look where this is going. So this smell, this olfactory tract is going right here in this area near the amygdaloid body in the hippocampus. This is why sometimes if you smell things, it will retrieve memories for you, even if they're years back. So I could still walk in to my grandmother's house, and if she's baking a particular type of pie, and I can think about, oh, that one Christmas whenever I was 8 years old, right? Because it takes us back, because the smell is so intricately linked with emotions and memories. Whenever we look at the thalamus today, which is going to be this structure here, part of the diencephalon, when we look at this, what we're going to learn is that all sensory information flows through the thalamus except for smell. So this is why sometimes people, when they smell things, they may also have that emotional connection to the smell, even if it doesn't make sense. I know personally for me, my husband has to wear this one type of cologne, and he knows it, right? I want to jump his bones. As soon as I smell it, I'm like, oh yes. And that makes no logical sense, right? Because you don't just all of a sudden want to just jump your bones. Like, that doesn't work like that. But it does whenever that olfactory and that memory and those emotions all come back to that one thing that makes you think about something in particular. So he does it on purpose to me sometimes. I know he does, because he has figured me out. So there's lots of interesting ways that our brain works. So when we're talking about the thalamus, just remember, all sensory information will have to come through here, but not smell, not the information carried through cranial nerve 1, okay? The cingulate gyrus, if we go back, cingulate gyrus, you can see this right here. So we've got this large gyri that's superior to our corpus callosum. Remember this corpus callosum being the commissural fiber connecting the right and the left? Superior to the corpus callosum, you have this cingulate gyrus. The cingulate gyrus is involved in emotional bonding and attachment, especially between mom and baby. So whenever we're looking at cingulate gyrus, if we have a mom who is suffering from the depression after she has her baby, then sometimes this can create some distance between her and her child. And sometimes this is even felt within the child, and this can then affect their limbic system as well. So that is something to always take into consideration whenever it comes to the depression that can come sometimes for some mothers. You want to have somebody else that can kind of step in and coddle and cuddle and take care of that baby while mom tries to work through that particular process. The other thing that's important about the cingulate gyrus is that this can also be associated with emotional and behavioral disorders, not just the depression, but also anxiety, OCD. You can see it's also been linked to ADD, schizophrenia, psychiatric disorders, even autism. So they're looking at studies trying to figure out what's going on with the cingulate gyrus in different patient populations. And sometimes it's very hard because you have all of these overlapping things, and maybe it's not just one problem. Maybe it's not just the cingulate gyrus structure has changed and therefore the function has changed. Maybe it's also a link to, poisons in the environment, if that person is around a whole lot of toxic chemicals, if that person has gone through particular situations that are psychologically stressful events, maybe growing up, they were subjected to abuse. Lots of different things that can fall into what's going on inside of a person's brain. And sometimes it's hard to kind of like separate those things out. So they're still unclear on how to address any cingulate gyrus problems in particular patient populations. So I just put on here, start with what is clear. If you want to read more about this, you can go to this website up here at the top. That's where I got this information from. But when I say start with what is clear, what I mean by that is what can we actually do that we do know is impactful? Well, we know nutrition is great for the brain. Biofeedback is really good. Making sure that somebody has a support system, somebody to talk to, work it out. Ways to actually alleviate stress so that person doesn't feel like they're so burdened with things. There are things that we can do until we figure out how to maybe help people with cingulate gyrus dysfunction a little bit better. All right, so moving into the diencephalon. So that is basically cerebrum. So we've done cerebrum, the big part of the brain. We've done right hemisphere, left hemisphere. We've done the fibers that run through it. We've done the basal nuclei. You've seen the limbic system. So now we're going to move on to part number 2, which is the diencephalon. Whenever we're looking at the diencephalon, this is going to integrate sensory information with motor commands, and these are the 3 structures that are going to be within the diencephalon. It's the epithalamus, the thalamus, and the hypothalamus. I put this picture on here because whenever we are in lab and you're looking at the brain, especially in the mid-sagittal section, for some reason, I've seen a lot of students who will confuse the pituitary gland with the pineal. So I just wanted to point this out to you guys. If you see this circle right here, this is blown up. This is an enlargement of the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland actually hangs off of the hypothalamus, off of a little stalk called the infundibulum. The pineal gland does not. So what you want to do is you want to go posterior. So you want to find your corpus callosum, drop down inferior below that corpus callosum, and you will see the pineal gland, which is embedded within the epithalamus. Okay, so it's in the posterior portion of the epithalamus, and this particular gland is going to secrete melatonin. This is where your melatonin is going to come from that helps you sleep at night. But what I have over here that you can see, let me move this out of the way, is that this is the chemical conversion in order for your body to get to melatonin. So without getting too deep into biochemistry, what I want you to do is I want you to see that this is actually where we're going to start. So we would start with tryptophan. What do you guys think of whenever you think of tryptophan? Turkey, right? Everybody always thinks of turkey. Turkey is very high in tryptophan. Tryptophan will convert to 5-HTP. You may have even seen supplements on the shelf that are for 5-HTP. This is then going to do a conversion to serotonin. Remember, this is that neurotransmitter or that hormone that helps your brain to feel good. Then we have this next conversion in acetylserotonin, and then finally to melatonin. So why do I bring this all up? Because there are people who have trouble sleeping at night and they blame it on melatonin. They say that my body doesn't release enough melatonin, so therefore I need to take a melatonin supplement in order to go to bed at night. And here's what I have to say. You have to nourish your body throughout the entire day, not just depend upon the one thing to come in at the end of the night, because melatonin will be secreted as long as you have all of the preceding steps in order first. So if you're not eating foods that are high in tryptophan, that could be something that can be easily changed. So it's not just turkey, there's other things like beans and eggs, and you can find lots of tryptophan foods online. That's very easy to do. So you want to start your body, nourish it through the beginning of the day, so that by the end of the day, all of the chemical conversions that should have happened are actually occurring. You can see you would get the benefit of serotonin along the way, and then melatonin, in order for it to be secreted, here's the key, so you'll have to write this down, has to be dark. Melatonin is going to be secreted according to your circadian rhythms and your biological clock, and it has to be dark. So if you're not sleeping in complete darkness, that has to change. There should be no lights on from TVs or from computers, not even the little, power light that sits on some TVs, like in the bottom corner. There shouldn't be lights on outside of your window. If you need to get blackout curtains, that's all very important, because the darkness is what's necessary in order for melatonin to be secreted so that you can get to sleep. I've seen some patients take melatonin for so long that, again, if you take an exogenous substance, like we were kind of mentioned drugs a little bit the last class, if you take an exogenous substance over and over and over and over again, eventually your body is going to say, I don't need to make this anymore. And your endogenous supply is going to go down. So if you take care of your biochemistry throughout the day, it will help you whenever you get to the nighttime. I do hope to have some time to talk to you guys a little bit more in depth about sleep, because it is so important. So hopefully more of that stuff will be coming a little bit later on down the line. But just know that that melatonin, you have to have that complete darkness. You should be sleeping in a temperature that's somewhere between like 68, 73 degrees. Trying to sleep in something outside of that range is not good. Now, that being said, what if you're a night shift worker? It has to be secreted in dark. So our night shift worker is going to secrete it? No. It's not going to be secreted in anybody who is awake at nighttime. Whether you're a night shift worker or whether you are addicted to gambling and you stay in the casinos all night long, right? If you've ever been in the casino, do they have windows? No, there's no windows. The lights are on all the time, 24/7. It's super bright. That's why people don't get tired in there. That's why you forget what time it is, because your body no longer has connection to nature. You can't see anything about what time it should be. There's no clocks in there. So melatonin will not be secreted in those instances. What's the problem with that? The problem is that this is a little gland, and if you don't use it, you will lose it. Okay, so there is going to be problems long term. This little article, this is just a little blip. If you want to read the rest of it, it's over here in this little link right here. But this talks about how nocturnal light will actually inhibit the production of pineal melatonin, which possesses anti-carcinogenic properties and is able to inhibit the growth of slow-growing tumors. So this then becomes understandable why light at night, as well as circadian rhythm disturbances, can exert cancer-enhancing effects. Do we have more cancer now or less? What do you guys think? Huh?
Way more.
Way more, right? Way more. Do we have more people who are having sleep problems now or less? Way more, right? So we've got sleep issues. We've got cancer issues, we've got unhealthy issues. So the reason why I wanted to put this in here is because I know that there are sometimes situations where people straight out of school, they have to take the night shift job because other people don't want them. So if you have to take the night shift job, then you need to know some ways to support your body. And just know that that's why they will pay night shift workers more, because they know you're going to be hurting your physiology by taking a night shift job. So this article that is posted in Canvas in the assignment section is about what can I do if I do have to temporarily work night shift? How can I support myself so that I can still try to maintain some sense of homeostasis within the brain, okay? That's what that one is about. So I hope that that really is helpful for some of you guys. I know quite a number of students of mine who have gone on to go through nursing school and they're now working night shift, and it's a struggle for them. So that was the epithalamus, pineal glands creating melatonin. Now let's talk about the thalamus. So if you look at the thalamus, you can see it right here. So the thalamus is going to sit about midline in between the two ventricles, the two lateral ventricles within the brain. This thalamus, you want to remember it as the traffic directing cop. If you ever have been in an accident, or let's say you're not in the accident, let's say you come upon an accident on a highway, okay? There's going to be cops that are out there. Parts of the highway are closed off. If it's really bad, they will start directing and say, you go here, you go there, exits will be blocked, they'll reroute people, and you might have to turn around and make a U, maybe you can't go forward. So that is what the thalamus is going to do. It's going to receive all of the sensory information, except for what? Smell, perfect. So it'll receive all of the sensory information and it'll direct it to the appropriate place within the cerebrum. So this is going to get the sensory information from the spinal cord as well as cranial nerves, and it is going to send it to the cerebral cortex. It will also relay information between the basal nuclei that we just saw and the cerebral cortex. So whenever you're looking at the thalamus, that means that this is going to be a very busy place, and there's a lot of stuff that is going to be going on within this particular thalamus. If we look at this mid-sagittal section of it, the best way to identify this in lab is to look for what looks like a little alien eyeball inside of the brain. And this little alien eyeball is the interthalamic adhesion. This is the piece that holds the right side and the left side of the thalamus together. So around this little eyeball is where your thalamus is actually going to be. Hypo means below, so the hypothalamus is going to be this area here right below the thalamus. This is also a part of the diencephalon as well. So you have the hypothalamus, the thalamus, and then of course the epithalamus, which is where the pineal gland is going to be. Okay, we're going to watch this quick video over the thalamus and the hypothalamus so that you can see some of the functions for these two particular glands right here.
Welcome back to our lesson on the nervous system. In this video, we will discuss the thalamus and the hypothalamus. These two structures are responsible for many bodily functions, some of which include regulating body temperature.
Sorry, let me see if I can make this bigger.
Welcome back to our lesson on the nervous system. In this video, we will discuss the thalamus and the hypothalamus. These two structures are responsible for many bodily functions, some of which include regulating body temperature, regulating our circadian rhythm, integrating functions of the autonomic nervous system, and even causing our bodies to respond to different emotional states. For the rest of this video, we will discuss the details of these functions and more. Great, so let's begin. The thalamus resides in the diencephalon portion of the forebrain, and it is located superior to the hypothalamus and inferior to the cerebrum. Many sensory neuron pathways, except those concerned with smell, pass through the thalamus, and therefore, many functions of the thalamus are related to processing sensations. In particular, the thalamus is thought to consolidate or group sensory inputs into a cohesive feeling or experience. For example, holding a cup of hot tea would stimulate receptors that detect sensations of heat, texture, and also the shape of the cup. Yet we don't experience each of these sensations separately because the thalamus combines these initially separate sensations into a whole complete feeling or experience. Though the thalamus can process feelings, such as pain, it would not know which part of the body is experiencing that pain. Said another way, The thalamus cannot localize our sensations. In fact, it relies on the sensory areas of the cerebrum to do so. As a result of this, after the thalamus combines sensory inputs, it then has to relay this packaged information to the parietal lobe, where we gain more precise awareness of our sensations. Some other functions of the thalamus include regulation of consciousness, stimulating feelings of wakefulness and alertness, and also temporarily suppressing unimportant sensations. By temporarily blocking minor sensations, the thalamus allows the cerebrum to concentrate on more important tasks. For example, when you focus on a task such as reading a book or writing a paper, you are less likely to notice small occurrences such as someone else walking into the room. The last part of the diencephalon that we will discuss is located below or inferior to the thalamus and is called the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is thought to play a role in many bodily functions. First, it is thought to integrate autonomic responses to different emotions. Basically, when the hypothalamus detects a change in emotional state, the autonomic nervous system then triggers a reflex response. Certain emotions, such as anger or embarrassment, cause a more noticeable response. For instance, when we get angry, our heart rate will increase, or when we are embarrassed, we tend to blush. Another major function of the hypothalamus is the regulation of our body rhythms. These are the processes that occur in sync with a day, or a 24-hour period. These rhythms, often referred to as our biological clock, are regulated by the hypothalamus and affect your day-to-day life. Secretion of hormones, sleep cycles, changes in mood, and our mental alertness can all fluctuate with our bodily rhythm. For instance, mental alertness fluctuates depending on one's circadian rhythm. Consequently, a person who usually sleeps at night would be more alert in the morning and less alert at night. The next major function of the hypothalamus is the regulation of our food intake. The hypothalamus regulates food intake by controlling peristalsis, which is the movement of food through the digestive tract. And it also controls feelings of satiety and fullness. The hypothalamus is able to perform these functions by responding to changes in blood nutrient levels, to chemicals secreted by fat cells, and to hormones secreted by our intestines. Perhaps the most vital function of the hypothalamus is being the nervous system's link to the endocrine system. The hypothalamus performs this function via its connection to the anterior pituitary gland. This connection is important because it allows the hypothalamus to regulate the pituitary gland. By producing special hormones called releasing hormones, the hypothalamus can directly affect hormone secretion of other organs. In fact, releasing hormones, also known as releasing factors, stimulate the secretion of other hormones. For example, GHRH, or growth hormone releasing hormone, stimulates the anterior pituitary to secrete GH, or growth hormone. Further, since the pituitary gland produces its own releasing factors, the hypothalamus indirectly affects other organs of the endocrine system, such as the adrenal cortex and the thyroid. One analogy that might simplify this concept is to think of the pituitary gland as being the parent of the endocrine system, and the hypothalamus as being the grandparent. Lastly, the hypothalamus acts as its own center for hormone production. It produces ADH, which helps the body maintain proper blood volume, and it also produces oxytocin, which triggers uterine contractions during labor. Because of these functions, the hypothalamus is considered crucial to maintaining homeostasis and many other autonomic responses. This concludes our discussion on the thalamus and the hypothalamus.
Okay, so in regards to the endocrine system, yes, one thing you must remember always is the hypothalamus is the connection between your nervous system and your endocrine system. Your nervous system helps maintain homeostasis and will regulate things incredibly quickly. Your endocrine system will help regulate things, but on a slower level. So they have similar goals in mind, of course, with maintaining the homeostasis, but one does it very quickly, which is the nervous system. The other does it very slowly, which is the endocrine system. So we actually will talk about the hypothalamus a whole lot more whenever we get into 2402. So I do have a slide in here that will kind of streamline the things that I want you to definitely remember. As you can see, there's a lot that the thalamus and the hypothalamus are going to be responsible for. So whenever we're looking at the thalamus, there are groups of nuclei that are going to help with regulating where all of the sensory information is coming from and then where it's going to go. If you're the words person, this is your slide right here. For those of you who like pictures, this is your slide. What you're seeing is that this is the thalamus, and we have different sensory information that will come from different locations into the thalamus, and then it will be directed out to different parts of the brain. So just keep in mind that it's like that traffic directing cop that is going to say, you get to go here, and oh, because this is where you need to be, you have to go this way. That's what the thalamus is really working on controlling. If you like charts a little bit better, there's also a chart for you. So either of those three slides you can use, just depending upon your preference and your learning style, but they're all essentially saying the same thing. For the hypothalamus, here's the 8 functions that you're definitely going to want to make sure you remember. So as the video said, it secretes its own hormones. It helps with regulating things like body temperature, controlling the autonomic functions. I'm not going to read all of these to you, but probably put a star next to regulating circadian rhythms. That's incredibly important. That's your 24-hour biological clock. There are things that are going to have to occur within separate hours of the day within your system. That goes beyond this class. I teach that in 2402. But that hypothalamus has to be healthy in order to help you regulate that circadian rhythm. And then, of course, being the connection between the nervous system and the endocrine system, kind of like I said. As the video said, it will produce emotions and behavioral drive. So it's your hypothalamus that will help you with, am I hungry? Am I thirsty? Do I want to have sex? How do I feel right now? Hypothalamus has a major role in those things. So very important, not just in all of the normal things that we would think about, how do we maintain homeostasis, but also in emotional issues as well. The mammillary bodies are inferior to the hypothalamus. If we look at a picture, I'm going to show you. So here's the hypothalamus, and then you can see the mammillary body right here. The mammillary body helps control reflexive eating movements. I talked about Alzheimer's patients a little bit already, but if you've never been around an Alzheimer's patient, one thing that you may not know is as their brain starts to degenerate, they forget how to eat. And we think, well, you just put food in your mouth and then you just chew it and you just go. But in Alzheimer's patients, because things have started to change, they don't always know how to eat. If you look again, here's the hypothalamus. It will tell you if you're hungry, if you are thirsty. If the signal is that you are one of those, then you have the mammillary body very close by that will allow you to carry that action out. But if things have started to change within the brain, like in an Alzheimer's patient, they just kind of play around with their food and they just move their tongue around in their mouth and they're not really sure what to do with it. Sometimes it falls out of their mouth. So that reflexive eating thing that we take advantage of and we think is normal is actually something that is a part of our brain structure. The infundibulum is that stalk that will connect the hypothalamus to the pituitary gland so that the hypothalamus can help regulate the hormones that are going to be necessary within the endocrine system. And then you have the tuber cinerum, which is between the infundibulum and the mammillary bodies that will produce hormones that will affect that pituitary gland. Again, we'll get deeper into the hypothalamus's role in the endocrine system when we get into 2402, not right now. So here's another picture looking at all of the different areas. You can see all of the different regions in the nuclei, and then here again you can see some of those functions in regards to what each particular portion of the hypothalamus is going to be responsible for. So now we've done cerebrum and diencephalon. What were the three portions to the diencephalon? Thalamus, epithalamus, hypothalamus, right? Which one of those is going to direct sensory information? Thalamus. Which one of those is going to produce the hormone that will help you sleep at night? Epithalamus, because it has the pineal gland, right? So the hypothalamus connects the nervous system and the endocrine system. It's going to also be responsible for the emotional drives, like, do you want to have sex? Are you hungry? Are you thirsty? It will help with regulating different autonomic functions. So those are your three portions to your diencephalon. Brain stem. As we move down further inferior, you can see the thalamus here in purple, and now we're going to go into our brain stem. So you're fill in the blank right here for brain stem. When you think of the brain stem, I want you to think about breathing. That's the first B, breathing and being alive. Breathing and being alive. The brain stem is going to be so incredibly important, and there are so many different autonomic functions that are going to occur within the brain stem, that the best way that I can help you remember this is to tell you the story that I was told whenever I was teaching this one semester a couple years ago. I had a guy in my class who was a trained military sharpshooter. And he said that what they do in their training is they always go for the brainstem. If there is any situation where someone is in imminent and immediate danger, they are trained to shoot directly to the brainstem, so it's an immediate kill. So what they do is they visualize a T on the person's face. So in between the two eyes is the top of the T, and then down to the nose is the bottom of the T. And somewhere within that T, they need to aim for, even if they're looking at them from the back of the head, they have to visualize where the T would be. And if they can shoot right into the brainstem, specifically, the goal is to get this one right here, this portion called the medulla oblongata. If they do, then it's over. One and you're done. That's what they call it. One and done, and that person will die. So I learned two things that day. The brainstem is for breathing and being alive, right? As if I didn't already know that. But no, I learned two things. Two things were the medulla oblongata, so incredibly important that if the bullet, which would normally ricochet off of different skull bones in the way that we have like these curves around the skull bones, if the bullet can penetrate just right, then there is no ricochet and it's going straight for the medulla, you will die. The second thing that I learned is don't make that guy mad. So he was super sweet, so I never had to worry about that. I never even heard that man complain throughout the entire semester. He was a really great guy, incredibly smart. And so I appreciate him teaching me that, because that is very helpful for my students as you learn that this particular portion of the brainstem is incredibly, incredibly important to keep your heart beating and to keep you breathing. So that's the breathing and being alive part, especially whenever it comes to this medulla oblongata. But what we're going to do is we're going to start in the green. So we'll start with the midbrain since it's superior, and then we will work our way down to the pons and then get into the medulla. If we're looking at the midbrain, there is a structure called the tectum. These are two pairs of sensory nuclei. If we're talking about the two pairs together, the terminology is corpora quadrigemina. If we're talking about them individually, then we can call them by their names, the superior colliculi or the inferior colliculi. These parasensory nuclei are for the visual and auditory reflexes that you need in order to protect you and keep you safe. So for example, if all of a sudden you're sitting in here and you're listening to me, you hear my voice, if outside of the hallway, you hear something really loud, what are you reflexively going to do? Turn your head, right? Or if you see something out this window that is a huge like red blast, what are you going to do? Turn your head. So the sensory nuclei, the corpora quadrigemina, are for you to turn and look if you see something in your periphery or if you hear something that is not within your visual field. It is that protective nature of what is happening around me. Do I need to run and flee? Okay, that's what the corpora quadrigemina is for. The tegmentum, here is where we would have the red nucleus and the substantia nigra. So if you remember back to what we were talking about for the basal nuclei and the Parkinson's disease, this is the structure right here. This is where you have that large collection of the dopamine producing neurons. And if this becomes injured, this is where we would have issues with the Parkinson's disease. The cerebral peduncles are nerve fibers that are going to contain descending fibers to connect to the cerebellum. And this will be descending motor command fibers and as well as ascending sensory fibers to the thalamus. If you want a video to watch for more information on the midbrain, that's what this video is right here. You do not have to watch it, but if you would like to watch it, feel free to do that, okay? So again, here's a view of that brainstem. You can see on this particular view, the corpora quadrigemina. Remember, quad means 4, so 1, 2, 3, 4. The superior are on the top, obviously, inferior on the bottom. Best way that I can always remember this is to remember eyes over ears. So eyes are superior to ears. The superior colliculi is for your visual reflexes and the inferior colliculi is for your auditory reflexes. Here you can see the substantia nigra. Obviously it's named because it is black. So very easy to see the color change in this particular area right here where we have those dopamine neurons that we depend upon inhibiting that basal nuclei so that we have that subconscious regulation. Just another way to view it. So if you prefer this particular chart type structure, then by all means feel free to use this one as well. The pons. Whenever we're looking at the pons, this contains the sensory and motor nuclei of cranial nerves 5, 6, 7, and then part of 8. If you're not familiar with Roman numerals, then I do want you to make sure that you start learning how to use Roman numeral numbers, because when we are going to identify cranial nerves, we don't use English numbers. It's always going to be Roman numeral form. So this is 5, 6, 7, and 8. These nuclei are involved with respiration. And we also have the tracts that will process and relay information sent to or from the cerebellum. So there is that attachment to the cerebellum as well. Transverse pontine fibers will link the nuclei of the pons with the opposite cerebellar hemisphere. If you want a video over the pons, here is a video for you. I just want to show you this really quickly because we talked about breathing and being alive. Within the pons, you have these two different centers. You have an apneustic center and a pneumotaxic center to help you with regulating your breathing. There's two different centers because they do two different things. This one is going to help facilitate inspiration, okay? This one is going to cut off inspiration at a certain point to make sure that it doesn't continue too long. This is why you cannot take a breath in and just continue to breathe in for forever. There is going to be a limitation to this. Obviously we have you guys haven't learned it because it's 2402, we have the chemoreceptors and the baroreceptors that are going to be monitoring our blood, and they are going to be around these brainstem structures as well in order to make sure that you always have the right level of oxygen and carbon dioxide and your pH is correct, because that is necessary for homeostasis. If you were to breathe in for too much too long, you're going to disturb that balance. So that's why we have the balancing act between these two centers within the pons to make sure that you're breathing appropriately and everything stays within homeostasis within your blood. Here's a view from the lateral aspect. If you like this view with this chart, again, I'm going to tell you it's really about what your learning style is, whether you want to look at the video, whether you want to look at the pictures, the word slides, the charts. It's totally and completely up to you. I put them all in here for you. The medulla. So now here we are, the most inferior part of the brainstem. It is going to look similar to the spinal cord, and some people actually do get it a little bit confused with the spinal cord. But it's not the spinal cord, okay? It's the inferior portion of the brainstem. This is going to be very important for cardiovascular and respiratory system. We'll talk about how in 2402. So what I want you to know for 2401 is that there are 3 groups of nuclei within the medulla. They're going to help control visceral functions. What does visceral mean? Organs. We've got sensory and motor nuclei of cranial nerves associated with 5 of them. So what number is this? 8, good. 9, 10, 11, 12. And this is a relay station for communication between the brain and the spinal cord. When we're looking at the reflex centers within the medulla, we have to talk about the reticular formation. Now, the reticular formation is not just in the medulla, but this is where I'm going to talk about it. This will run through the entire brainstem, and this is going to be helpful in sleep-wake cycles, which is the important part of the reticular formation, because if you have damage within the reticular formation, obviously you see this can lead to a coma. If somebody can't wake you up, then the reticular formation is not working appropriately, because it should lead to a state of awareness and alertness, even if you're in a deep state of sleep. It's harder to wake someone up whenever they're in deep sleep because their brain is going through different things at that time than in light sleep. And sometimes if you wake someone up in deep sleep, they might be a little confused. They're not completely, aware of what's going on, what's happening, but you can still wake them up because the reticular formation is still active. If you can't wake them up though, then they're in that state of comatose. And that is whenever there is going to be major problems within the brain as well as other organs. So the reticular formation, very important in these sleep-wake cycles. It will receive generalized, keyword generalized, somatic and visceral sensory information, not specific information. So, for instance, the example I put in here, if you wake up in the middle of the night because you hear something, but you're not quite sure what that sound is, that's your reticular formation working to wake you up so that you become aware. There may be something that you need to be more cohesively aware of than you just sleeping through it. So back in the day before they had alarms, and back in the day before we could lock the doors, and back in the day before, we had all these levels of protection around us, whenever people were hunter-gatherers and they slept in tents, if they hear something coming, they need to be able to wake up and defend and protect. So that is still within us, even though we don't necessarily live in that type of society anymore. So that's what the reticular formation is there to do. We also have reflexive centers for cardiovascular and, of course, for respiratory. So here in the cardiovascular centers, we have cardiac and vasomotor centers. Does anybody know what vasomotor means? So if we break it down, what's motor? You guys know what motor is. What did you say, movement? Movement, right? So motor is some sort of movement. Vasovascular. So vasomotor means if our blood vessels need to move, they're either going to contract or they're going to dilate. So there's different situations where we might need to contract versus dilate. So these cardiovascular centers here within the medulla oblongata will help with not only controlling our heart rate and the strength of our heart contractions, but also help control blood to move through the peripheral tissues according to whatever the needs are at the time of the body, whether it is to contract or to dilate. The respiratory centers set the pace for the respiratory movements, and of course their activity will be regulated by the input from the pons because of those 2 centers for respiration that I showed you within the pons. Now, whenever we're looking at relay stations within the medulla oblongata, just know that this, of course, is going to pass some somatic sensory information to the thalamus, because we've kind of already said that. But I want you to make sure you definitely highlight this word here, decussation. To decussate means to cross over. So motor tracks leaving these nuclei will cross to the opposite side of the brain, specifically at the structure that we call the decussation of pyramids. The decussation of pyramids is only found within the medulla, and whenever we're looking at how the left side of our brain can control the right side of the body, it's because of this decussation that happens, the crossing of the tracks within the medulla oblongata. I'm going to show you the picture of the decussation of pyramids here in just a second. When we start talking about the corticospinal and the corticobulbar tracts within this semester, we'll be talking again about the decussation of pyramids as we talk about how this information is going to cross over from one side to the other. And then lastly, two more nucleuses, solitary nuclei, will receive visceral sensory information. So up here you have the somatic sensory, here you have visceral sensory. The inferior olivary complex relays information about somatic motor commands to the cerebellum. That will make more sense once we actually talk about the cerebellum. So here's a lateral view looking at the medulla oblongata, again, with that lovely little chart, if you like that view. But here is your decussation of your pyramids. So you can see the pyramids here. So here's where you can faintly see that they're trying to represent the crossing of the tracks from one side of the body to the other side of the brain. Okay, so I just want you to remember that is within the medulla oblongata. That is not in the spinal cord. Even though the two structures look very similar, the medulla and the spinal cord, it's not the spinal cord, it's the medulla. Okay, anybody have any questions about anything?